The rise of Anne Boleyn. From lady-in-waiting to queen, the story begins not in blood and steel, but in glittering courts and whispered corridors. Imagine the grand halls of Tudor England, candlelight flickering against cold stone walls, and a young woman stepping into the center of history. Her name was Anne Boleyn, and though she could not have known at the time, her life would change the very course of England forever. But who was she before she became queen, before the crown, before the executioner's sword, and was born into a family of ambition? The Boleyns were not the most powerful clan in England, but they were clever, social climbers in a dangerous age. Her father, Thomas Boleyn, pushed his children toward influence, placing them in royal courts across Europe, and was educated in the Netherlands and later at the glittering French court, where she learned not only the arts of music, dance, and languages, but also the subtler games of charm, wit, and seduction. By the time Anne returned to England, she was no ordinary lady-in-waiting. She carried with her the polish of Europe, fashion, grace, and a fiery intelligence that set her apart from the quiet, obedient women of the English court. She was bold. She was sharp. She was unlike anyone King Henry VIII had ever met. But here's the question. How does a young woman, not born royal, rise high enough to capture the eye of a king? The answer lies in timing, fate, and a dangerous blend of ambition. Henry VIII was already restless in his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. After years of trying, Catherine had given him only one surviving child, a daughter, Princess Mary. But Henry craved a son, an heir to secure the Tudor dynasty. Dissatisfaction was brewing, and into this storm walked Anne Boleyn. At first, she served quietly at court as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine. But soon, her wit, elegance, and captivating dark eyes drew attention. Unlike many women who fell under the king's gaze, Anne was different. She refused to be just another mistress. When Henry approached her, she did not surrender easily. She played a dangerous game, resisting his advances while drawing him deeper into obsession. This was Anne's first masterstroke. She dared to hold out for more. She wanted marriage, not scandal. She wanted the crown, not just the king's bed. And so, Henry began his relentless pursuit. He wrote her letters. Over 20 survive today, filled with passion and desperation. I beg to know expressly your intention touching the love between us, he pleaded in one, declaring himself stricken by the dart of love. These were not the words of a distant monarch. These were the words of a man enslaved by desire. But Anne's rise was not just about romance. It was about power. She quickly became a symbol of change. To marry her, Henry would have to break with Catherine, and that meant breaking with the Catholic Church itself. This is where Anne's story becomes truly dangerous. By refusing the king, she forced him to choose between her and the Pope, between passion and obedience, between love and duty. And Henry chose Anne. Thus began the English Reformation. The king declared himself the head of the Church of England, tearing his country away from Rome, just to make Anne his wife. In 1533, after years of tension and defiance, Anne Boleyn was crowned queen in a lavish ceremony at Westminster Abbey. Crowds gathered, some in awe, others in suspicion. For Anne, this was the peak of her triumph. The daughter of a courtier had risen higher than anyone could have dreamed. She wore gowns of gold and crimson, her black hair catching the torchlight as she walked beside the king. But if the court marveled at her beauty, it also whispered behind her back. Many despised her, calling her a witch, a seductress, a usurper, and knew the hostility she faced, but she carried herself like a queen. She was bold in council, unafraid to speak her mind, even in front of Henry. She was no silent partner. She was a force. And yet, even as the crown glittered on her head, shadows were gathering. The one thing Anne could not control was fate. She gave Henry a daughter, Elizabeth, the future Queen of England, but no son. Miscarriages followed, each one eroding her position at court. The very thing that had elevated her, Henry's obsession, was slowly turning against her. The whispers grew louder. Enemies plotted. The same boldness that once fascinated Henry now angered him. And though Anne had risen higher than any courtier's daughter could imagine, she would soon learn that the higher one climbs in Tudor England, the deadlier the fall. Her story was no longer about love. It was about survival. Would she hold her crown, or would history swallow her whole? Betrayal, accusations, and the fall of a queen, the crown that once glittered on Anne Boleyn's head now began to feel like a noose tightening around her neck. What had started as a fairy tale rise from lady-in-waiting to queen quickly descended into a nightmare of suspicion, betrayal, and whispers of treason. Let us step back into the shadowed halls of Henry VIII's court, where every glance was loaded with meaning. Every smile could hide a dagger, and loyalty was a game few dared to play. At first, Anne believed her crown was secure. She was the lawful queen, crowned in triumph, mother to the young Princess Elizabeth. But Henry's hunger for a son, the heir that England demanded, was relentless. With each miscarriage, Anne's position weakened. Every lost child was not just a private grief, but a political disaster. To Henry, it felt like God's curse, a punishment for defying the Pope and breaking with Rome. The courtiers began to murmur. Was Anne truly destined to be queen? Or had Henry brought ruin on England for the sake of a witch? Enemies closed in. Chief among them was Thomas Cromwell, Henry's ruthless chief minister. Once an ally of Anne, Cromwell soon found himself at odds with her sharp tongue and unyielding will, and interfered in politics, took sides in disputes, and openly opposed Cromwell's decisions. To a man like him, her influence was a threat, and in Henry's court, threats rarely lived long. But Cromwell was clever. He knew Henry's greatest weakness was his desperate need for a male heir. All Cromwell needed was to plant the seed of doubt. Perhaps Anne was not just unlucky, but unfaithful. Perhaps the queen herself was betraying the king. Imagine the whispers creeping through the palace corridors. Accusations of adultery. Scandalous tales of and seducing men at court. Even her own brother, George Boleyn, was named as her lover. It was unthinkable, shocking, but in Henry's fragile, frustrated mind, the impossible began to feel possible. And so, the machinery of Anne's downfall began to turn. In April 1536, Henry's attentions had already shifted toward Jane Seymour, a quiet, obedient lady-in-waiting, the complete opposite of fiery, outspoken Anne. As Henry's heart drifted, Cromwell struck. He gathered evidence of Anne's alleged affairs, confessions wrung from terrified courtiers, rumors twisted into fact. A queen accused of treason was already as good as condemned. On May 2nd, Anne was arrested. The Queen of England was led from her chambers in shock and humiliation, taken to the Tower of London through Traitor's Gate. The same fortress that had witnessed countless prisoners' last days would now hold the most powerful woman in the realm. Can you picture it? And, dressed in rich gowns yet treated like a criminal, walking the cold stone corridors of the tower. The same walls that had once heard her laughter as queen now echoed with silence, broken only by the clank of guards' armor. The trial that followed was little more than theater, and was accused of adultery with multiple men, some of them her closest friends, others mere courtiers who had spoken kindly of her. Even her brother George was dragged into the storm, accused of incest with his own sister. The evidence was flimsy, often contradictory, but it didn't matter. The outcome had been decided long before she set foot in the courtroom. The spectacle was brutal. The hall was packed with lords and nobles, many of them eager to see Anne fall. Witnesses spoke in trembling voices, their words rehearsed, their fates tied to the king's will, and defended herself with dignity and fire, declaring her innocence again and again. But in Tudor England, innocence meant nothing once the king turned against you. On May 15th, 1536, Anne Boleyn was found guilty of adultery, incest, and high treason. The sentence was death, by burning, or at the king's mercy, by the sword. For Henry, the trial had been more than a legal judgment. It was a cleansing of his past. And, once the love of his life, the woman for whom he had torn England away from Rome, was now painted as a betrayer, a seductress, a danger to his throne. and Henry needed her gone to make way for Jane Seymour and the son he still desperately longed for. Anne's world had collapsed in less than 3 years. From coronation to condemnation, her fall was as swift as it was merciless. She had played the dangerous game of Tudor politics, and now the game was over. As and awaited her fate in the Tower, the city of London buzzed with gossip. Some pitied her, some cursed her, others secretly admired her defiance. But all knew one thing: the Queen's final chapter was near. The date was set, May 19th, 1536. And Boleyn would face execution, but not by axe, as was the English custom. Henry, in a strange act of mercy, summoned a French swordsman, renowned for his swift, clean strikes. Was it compassion? Or was it Henry's final way of controlling how Anne would be remembered? The night before her execution, Anne prepared herself. Witnesses said she seemed strangely calm, even cheerful, as though her suffering was nearly over. She prayed, she confessed, and she made peace with her God. But beneath her composure, she must have felt the weight of betrayal from husband, from friends, from the very crown that had once made her queen. And so, the stage was set for one of the most haunting executions in English history. The execution, a queen's final moments on the scaffold the morning of May 19th, 1536, dawned cool and gray over London. The Tower's ancient walls loomed heavy with silence, as if the stones themselves knew they were about to witness history. In her chamber, Anne Boleyn rose for the last time. She was 35 years old, and within hours, her life would end beneath the sharp flash of a foreign sword. But she did not crumble. She dressed with the dignity of queen. Accounts say she wore a dark gray gown trimmed with crimson, colors that symbolized both piety and royalty. Over her shoulders, a cloak of ermine, a reminder of her once glittering status. She placed a small headdress upon her dark hair and clasped a prayer book tightly in her hands. When the guard arrived to escort her, she did not resist. She walked with calm steps, head held high, toward the Tower Green. Unlike many condemned prisoners who exited through Traitor's Gate and had never left the Tower since her arrest. Now, she would leave only in death. Outside, a crowd had gathered: nobles, courtiers, soldiers, and common citizens. They had come to see the Queen fall, some out of curiosity, some out of hatred, some because they feared what might happen if they did not attend. The scaffold stood ready, a simple wooden platform built for a single moment of terrible spectacle. Imagine the scene: the hush of the crowd, the morning air heavy with anticipation, and stepping onto the platform with a grace that stunned even her enemies. The French swordsman, summoned specially by Henry, stood quietly to one side. Unlike the clumsy English axemen, this man was renowned for his skill. One clean strike, swift and merciful. Yet even that thought brought no comfort, and looked out at the faces before her. She knew her every word would be remembered. This was her last chance to shape her legacy. And so she spoke with a strange serenity. "Good Christian people, I am come hither to die, according to law. For by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I pray and beseech you all to pray for the life of the king, my sovereign lord and yours, who is one of the best princes on the face of the earth, who has always treated me so well." There was no accusation, no defiance, only humility. It was the speech of a woman who knew resistance was useless. To condemn Henry would be to condemn her daughter, Elizabeth, and shielded her child's future with her silence. When her words ended, she knelt upon the scaffold. Two women stepped forward to help her. They removed her ermine cloak, tucked her long hair beneath the small cap she wore, and placed a blindfold over her eyes. Anne's lips moved softly in prayer. "To Christ I commend my soul. Jesus, receive my soul." The swordsman approached quietly. To ease her final moments, he called for his assistant to fetch him his sword, and, blindfolded, turned her head instinctively toward the noise. And in that instant, before she could brace, before she could draw another breath, the Frenchman struck. One clean blow. Her head fell, and the life of Anne Boleyn ended. The crowd gasped, some in shock, some in silence. It was over in a heartbeat. A queen, once the most powerful woman in England, reduced to a body on the scaffold. Her ladies in waiting, weeping, gathered her remains. With no coffin prepared, they placed her body and head in an old arrow chest, and she was buried in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula within the tower itself. No grand funeral, no royal honors, just a quiet grave among others who had met the same fate. But Anne's story did not end there. From the shadow of her fall rose her daughter, Elizabeth, the little girl Henry dismissed as useless. Decades later, that child would become Elizabeth I, one of the greatest monarchs England has ever known, and, though dead, lived on through her legacy, shaping history in ways no sword could silence. And what of Henry? Within days, he was betrothed to Jane Seymour. Anne's memory was erased from court, her initials carved into palaces chipped away. She had been queen, and then she was nothing. Yet centuries later, we still remember her. Not as the traitor her enemies painted her to be, but as a woman who dared to rise in a man's world, who challenged a king, and who paid with her life. Her rise was meteoric, her fall catastrophic, and her death tragic, haunting, unforgettable. The Tower of London still stands, and many say her spirit lingers there. Some claim to see her ghost, walking headless through the chapel grounds where she was buried. Perhaps it is only legend. Or perhaps, like her story, Anne Boleyn refuses to fade into silence. Because how can history ever forget the queen who faced the sword?